Hello, I'm Robert and helping you if you're scared, a voluntary fact checker. And this is about all the stories about people who are scared of getting vaccinated. Now, I'm not doing this for people who've decided for one reason or another they don't want to be vaccinated. These are people who do want to be vaccinated and they get scared by these false stories. And so the thing you've got to bear in mind is that most of the stories you read online about people being injured by vaccines are completely false. They're very convincing to the people who think they've been injured, but most of them are completely false. There have been a very few cases of people who have been harmed by the vaccines. So I don't want to say that they're not. The problem is all these false stories and the infodemic and everything means that the very few people who have been harmed, then they are not getting the right attention that they should, because other people think, well, this is just another one of these fake false vaccine injury stories. So it's really quite harmful for the few people who do have something. So the situation is that if you get vaccinated by Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, then the Pfizer and Moderna, they can slightly increase the risk that you have anyway of getting myocarditis, which is kind of inflammation of the heart. And you often get that from infectious diseases. This is why it's really quite hard to know if you got it from Pfizer or Moderna or you got it from an infectious disease. And you can get it from COVID. And lots of people are getting myocarditis from COVID and much more serious myocarditis from COVID. The heart inflammation from the vaccine, then the main thing about if you do get this heart inflammation, it is not a heart attack. The heart inflammation just means that your heart is irritated, and it's very much like you get headaches from a vaccine. You can do. It's not because the vaccine did anything to your head, it's because your body reacted to the vaccine in the way it does to an illness, and by boosting its response to deal with infections and things. And part of that response could be a heart inflammation, as well as like a fever and things like that. So in this it's a very unlikely situation, only a few in a million, but if you do get the symptoms of a heart inflammation, then you need to see a doctor about it straight away and follow their advice. And the main thing that people do wrong, and the main thing they do wrong over the board in response to COVID, in response to COVID as well, with heart inflammation, is exercising too much. And especially if you're a young athlete and you do vigorous exercise every day, and then you get slight heart inflammation, you've got an important race coming up in a few months, whatever it is important to you, it might be a local school, it might be, you don't need to be an Olympic runner to be doing strenuous and to have races that are important to you, then you might feel like I can't even take 1 week off or a month off from doing this rigorous training. If you do that and you push through myocarditis, that's when it can go over to a heart attack, because that inflammation can then turn into something that harms your heart, and then you're at risk of a heart attack. And then if you're doing lots of running, then that's a situation where someone's got a dodgy heart can have a heart attack. And so you have to be careful if you get inflammation of the heart, either from COVID or from Pfizer, then go very easy and talk to your doctor, follow your doctor's advice. And so, and then the other thing is that some people get the Pfizer vaccine, and this is something that you can get with VAERS vaccines, they can get an allergic response. And this is why you're supposed to wait for 15 minutes after vaccination, at least a few minutes after you've been vaccinated, in case you get an immediate allergic response, because that can be very dangerous. And if you are at a medical facility, then they'll just come and they give you the right medication and you'll be okay. But if you sort of wandered away and there's an ambulance within reach and then you get a very serious allergic reaction, which is extremely rare, but does happen with Pfizer, then that's another situation where you can be harmed by it. And as far as I know, those are the only two main serious situations for Pfizer, then lots of minor things. And then AstraZeneca, they're the blood clots. And the blood clots are ones that people get, again, very rare, and it's much less than the difference between, you get a higher risk from taking the pill if you're a woman. There's a much higher risk as a result of being pregnant than there is of getting vaccinated by AstraZeneca. So it's an extremely remote risk. But it does happen. So again, very early on they didn't know how to treat it properly, because it's got a kind of back to front way of treating it. That if you treat it the normal way you would to blood clots, you can make it worse. But then they've learnt the details. So if you get blood clots after AstraZeneca, you should tell the doctor you've had your AstraZeneca vaccine, and then they will investigate and they will treat you the right way, and then your risk is greatly reduced of it harming you in any way. So those are the main things. And then, why do we get so many people reporting all sorts of strange, different things that they claim? There's another thing, you can get facial palsy again, and that is quite a common thing with some vaccines, that half your face goes a little bit numb. And it's not very serious, it eventually, most people that clears up and we could do. And that again is something that you get from the disease. And then you get, and then of course, if you're in a country where you have, and this is just about the entire world except China, if you're in a country where you get so many percent people getting COVID, and if you're not isolating yourself very strictly from everyone else, then you have a far higher risk from COVID of serious effects. And so it makes a lot of sense to get vaccinated. There's, if you are immunocompromised, you talk to your doctor, but nowadays the immunocompromised also, they recommend to get vaccinated. If you have any concerns, talk to your doctor. Don't use Dr. Google, because Dr. Google or social media, Dr. Facebook or Dr. Twitter is thoroughly misleading. You would not, if you got a strong pain in the side of your stomach, say, you wouldn't go on Google to search, you would ask your doctor. So, in the same way, for this, ask your doctor. Don't go to Google for treatment. That is not a sensible thing to do, and not a sensible thing to do for making what could be a life or death decision in the worst case. So then, why do so many people think that they have been harmed by vaccines? And as I say, do remember, it does very occasionally happen. So when you see someone online say, I've been harmed by vaccine, don't just jump on them and say, no, you haven't. Because very few cases, a few in a million will have been harmed. And a very, very few, or almost nobody for Pfizer, and a few cases of, especially early cases with AstraZeneca. And with Pfizer it could be, if they had a friend who was an athlete who pushed through it. But it's generally the myocarditis, it clears up very quickly and very mild for Pfizer, and much milder than myocarditis you get from vaccines, from the disease itself. Because if you get COVID, there's an increased risk of heart attack, especially in the first few weeks after you get COVID. Again, very small risk, and especially if you're young, but it's a percentage risk, but it's not, I have to look up the figures to look up what the percentage is, but there's a significant increase in your risk of getting a heart attack if you get COVID. But if you're young, your risk of heart attack is very low. So it's not like you're going to have lots of friends who had COVID who died of a heart attack. But if you look at statistically over the entire country, then it's a significant increase in risk, especially over the first few weeks. And even a year later, your risk of a heart attack, I think, is double if you've had a COVID in that year. Extremely low risk, but it's still double the extremely low risk it was if you hadn't had COVID. And significantly more than that in the first few weeks after you get infected. And that's not too surprising. It's an effect of some other infectious diseases. So, but it's particularly high and lasts for a particularly long time for COVID compared with some other infectious diseases. So then, now we look, and why do we get all these people who think they've been harmed by COVID who haven't? So very few have, and an awful lot think they have and they haven't. And the reason is that so many people have been vaccinated, and because we don't live forever. A combination of vaccinating millions of people and that people don't live forever leads to the situation that thousands of people, billions of people have been vaccinated, and this means that many thousands of people have died in the hour before they were about to be vaccinated, on the way to the appointment even, and thousands of people died in the hour after they were due to be vaccinated, after vaccination. And the ones who died before, you don't hear them. You don't got people going and saying on Twitter, my friend, he or she was going to get vaccinated and she died an hour before. Those people won't go on Twitter because because they don't make any connection with the vaccine. But the ones who do that an hour after, then they'll go on Twitter or Facebook and they say, look, my friend died just now after he or she got vaccinated. And so they make a connection, they think it's connected. And so you've just got to remember, in a city of 1 million, one person dies every hour, and there are 45 visits to emergency every hour. So if you go and get vaccinated and then next hour you rush off to emergency because of a sudden medical emergency, and the thing is that some of these things build up, and some of these things they're rather sudden, and some of them, like for instance, there's some effects of infectious diseases that can be quite serious, and for instance, and they can end up in hospital, and you mightn't know that you even had that infectious disease, because it can happen even if infectious disease is almost asymptomatic and you just feel slightly run down, and then suddenly you're rushed off to hospital for some emergency and you don't make that connection. And if you don't remember, your doctor will just say it's a mysterious thing. We don't know. We know that this is caused by various different things, and we don't know what caused it in your case. And so this happens very often. And so if you were vaccinated just before, and then you rushed off to hospital, and the doctor then says to you, we don't know what caused that, it happens quite often. And they say, I was vaccinated. And they say, well, that's not one of the things listed as something that's been discovered as a cause of vaccination. We will put this on the vaccine incidence list so that people can investigate to see if it is caused by the vaccine. And that person will likely go home and go on Twitter and say the doctor doesn't know what caused it, but they've put me on the list for vaccine, for potential investigation to see if it's something to do with the vaccine. We think it's caused by the vaccine. So that again, and lots of things end up on this list. And as you can see, because there's so many emergency visits and there's so many even deaths, and in one day, if you've got 1 million people, and that is like 10 big football stadiums, and if you imagine in 10 big football stadiums, everyone is vaccinated, then in an hour, in all those football stadiums, this including, of course, elderly people, I'll look at young people in a minute, but if you look at the full range of population, including elderly, then one of them in that stadium is going to, in those 10 stadiums, going to die every hour, and 45 are going to be off to emergency every hour. Of course, some of those are people who are sick already, so they wouldn't be at the football match, and some would be very elderly and they're no longer going to football matches. So in actual football matches, but you do still get quite a lot of emergencies in a large stadium in a football match. Most people don't know that. So just because there's so many people there, you expect it. And they just rush off and the other people don't even know. So this is why it'd be utterly astonishing if these this VAERS things and the MRHA yellow list thing, if it didn't include lots of deaths, if they didn't include like a couple of dozen deaths a day amongst every million who's vaccinated, then that would mean that the vaccine is a vaccine against all-cause mortality. To get heart diabetes, and not diabetes, or appendicitis, or I'm not a doctor. I'm a science blogger. But you could think of various things that can lead you to die for one reason or another, and it would be a vaccine against all of those. And that is obviously ridiculous. We don't have a vaccine that can, or indeed traffic accidents, but people wouldn't go online and tweet about my friend was killed in a traffic accident 1 hour after they were vaccinated. They wouldn't say that was caused by the vaccine, or my friend died falling down the stairs, or whatever now after vaccinated. In that case, they would not say that my friend died falling down the stairs because they were vaccinated. But there would be just as many of those as of these other things that they do go on and tweet about. So this is why you need experts and not Dr. Twitter. You need people who have devoted their life. And there are loads and loads of people. Let me just move this across, see if I can. Yeah, see, that's the page, yes. So you get loads and loads of people on, you get these people who have been trained as doctors, some of them. But if you're trained as a medical doctor to treat patients, now remember the thousands and thousands and thousands of doctors, and most of them won't be so foolish as to try to do amateur analysis. But some of them are, and there's one, I'm not going to name him because I don't want to kind of debunk a particular person, but you've probably heard of him. There's one person who's on YouTube every day, every week, and multiple times a week, and he's used to be he's connected with the medical profession. He's constantly telling people that they are at risk from vaccines, and they're not. So these people, so I don't want to go, there are several people who do that. I don't want to be individual about this. I don't want to connect this with a particular person. So there's one particular I've got in my mind, but there are quite a few people like that. So the people who go on YouTube and they use this and they don't use it correctly. They're not trained in statistics. They're not trained in maths. I'm trained in maths. I'm not trained in these statistics of analysing these. I would not be able to analyse this correctly because I don't have the correct training. But I did do a first degree in maths. I got a good honours degree, first class honours degree in maths. But I wouldn't consider myself to be qualified to do this sort of analysis because I haven't studied it. And then you get people who've never trained in maths. It's clear from the things they say that they're nowhere near the level of understanding of maths of someone who's even got a good higher in maths. They may have scraped their highers. They may have got decent highers even and forgotten it, but they clearly haven't remembered much about whatever maths they did. And then they're on YouTube telling the entire world that these ideas, and they're just not aware of how statistics works. They don't know how difficult it is to analyse these databases, given the vast number of deaths and the vast number of accidents that are every day with 1 million people. And these people just don't have a clue. They just don't have the most basic maths that is needed to analyse this sort of situation. they're trained in. So you can be trained as a doctor, and you can be trained in diagnosing patients. You can be a very good doctor. You can be very good understanding of medicine. You can understand anatomy very well, and yet not have a clue about how to analyse these statistics. So do be aware of that. And the people who do this analysis, they've learned the maths of it, they've probably done doctorates, they've probably written theses about it, their working life, they're working on this, and they work on it with many different diseases and many different topics, and lots of subtleties that they have to know about. And these are the people, and then just think to yourself, if we don't rely on these people to tell us they're safe, who do we rely on? And you might say, well, I happen to like this doctor who tweets on, he's often shared, I get lots and lots of tweets about him, and all my friends have been tweeting about him, and he says that it's dangerous, so we should rely on him. Now, is that the way you do it? That just someone who gets randomly virally shared a lot, that's the person that we should trust? And how would you convince other people to trust this particular doctor who has never been trained in statistics to tell you if it is safe to get vaccinated? How does that make sense? So try and think, when you start and you get these kind of shouting matches, people saying, so when you get these people online, so I'm really talking about this to the scared people rather than to people who are trying to persuade everyone else. So this is to try and understand these people, and if you talk to them, then just try to relate them and give them some of this background, and then just walk away, give them lots of space. Don't try to convince them, don't try to change their mind, because you are not going to be able to change their mind, but you may be able to give them some connection, some understanding. And one question you could ask is, who then should I rely on as my authority would tell me if vaccines are safe? Who in the world is the person that I should be relying on if it's not the FDA? And the FDA is not the government. FDA is independent of the government. FDA is independent of the CDC. FDA is set up deliberately to be independent because people are well aware of the possibility of assessments of whether a drug is safe being influenced by the government trying to persuade them, or by big pharma bribing them, and so on. And we have learned how to do this over many years and decades in order to keep safe and to keep our medicine safe. So we have these methods, and it's called systematic review. And even the people who do the review, they can't change the conclusions. It's designed in such a way, they're not robots, they're not like machines, they look at it like humans, but it's designed in such a way that they can't change their own conclusions. So we get people kind of talking to the World Health Organization saying, look, you've got to change what you said. They can't change. They're not people, they have this method they have to follow. And they follow that method, come to this conclusion, and that is how it has to be. That is the way to make it as clear as possible that it is not being influenced by people's whims. It's not influenced by governments. It's not influenced by big pharma. So next time you're thinking about, if you talk to these people, if you look at what the World Health Organization and the FDA say, you get all these people trying to persuade them to say something different, then ask yourselves, would you like them to be persuadable so that if enough people tweet and tell them to say something, that's what they will say? And the answer is no. And that is how it's set up. It's set up so they can't do that. They literally can't do it. They're not permitted to do it. They'd lose their job if they did that. So these systems are very reliable, very carefully thought out. And then also think about the vaccine safety that's been attested to by the drug regulators who are independent of government and independent of big pharma in the United States, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Japan, the World Health Organization pre-qualification path for vaccines, which is used by the weaker economies, and India, China, Of course, people say China and Russia, but people have less confidence in those countries' regulators outside of them. But all the ones that people have a lot of confidence in, like the FDA and the European Medicines Authority and the UK, and they're all very high reputation authorities, and they have all said that the vaccines are safe. So you can be very confident they are very safe vaccines. And it's really only if you're in a situation where there are your risk is just about zero, like in China, where with the zero COVID policy and almost nobody is getting infected, that's about the only situation where the very, very, very tiny risk from Pfizer and from Moderna would be even influenced even slightly to maybe think maybe I won't have the vaccine, and then even in China you'd think, but I want our country to be able to open up eventually. I want the COVID restrictions to be released a bit, and so then that would be a very good incentive to do it, and your risk is absolutely minute. So that's a situation. It really makes no sense at all for most people to even consider not being vaccinated from a logical point of view. And so I talk about 1 million people, so I'm just going to a few more things in this. And you typically need the 2,600 doctors and 45 emergencies to deal with. So 2,600 constantly employed doctors are needed to deal with a city of 1 million, and those are the same as the number of people who are vaccinated. If you had 1 million people vaccinated, then you need 2,600 doctors are looking after those 1 million people, and 45 of them will be off to emergency every hour of that day that they were vaccinated. So do bear that in mind. Now this is looking at the where are my glasses? I think these glasses I think are, oh, there they are. Just a second, let me look. So these are the deaths per million, and you divide by 36.5. Yeah, so what is that? That's by age group. So if you look at age 15 to 24, then you have 2 deaths per million, 2 a day. That's the number that will die a day. To get the deaths per million per day, you divide these numbers by 36.5, and so you've got 74 divided by 36.5 is twice 36.5 is 73, isn't it? So 74, that's 2. So if even in the younger age group of that goes down to 15 to 24, which is quite young. If you're in the age group 15 to 24, then if you have 1 million people in that age group, and it's because 1 million days is actually longer than a typical human lifetime. And so if you have even young people then about 2 a day will die if out of 1 million of them. And so most people have no idea how big a number 1 million is. So if you've got 1 million people vaccinated, you expect some deaths in that day from those vaccinated people, just as you expect some deaths in the day before it, even amongst the young people. So it's 1 a day for spread over 1 an hour spread over the entire population. It's 2 a day even for young people. Not because people die a lot, but because 1 million is a very huge number, and because we don't live forever, and 1 million days is a very large number of days. People don't realise how many days it is. And so that's what I was going to explain. And so the sudden emergencies seem very striking to people who are vaccinated, but it's just chance. It has to happen to someone out of that 1 million. If you happen to be that someone who has just been vaccinated and then is rushed off to hospital, or if a friend of yours is that someone who actually dies, then it seems very striking, and to you it seems to be cause and effect. But it has to happen once you vaccinate 1 million people. Out of those 1 million people, so 1 in a million chance, despite the movies, is an extraordinarily unlikely thing to happen. You don't expect 1 in a million chances to happen, except in the movies. And so, but if you vaccinate 1 million people, then it's just like with the lottery, you get extraordinarily unlikely things happen. You get people win the lottery when an individual person got extraordinarily remote chance of ever winning it. And this is kind of losing the lottery, as it were. Then you've got just a tiny chance, but a few people in a million are going to be dying on that day that they got vaccinated. And apart, of course, you've got to deal with the people who some of them would just say, well, I was going to go in, they'd be sick before they die, so they don't get vaccinated because they don't actually go in. So they had the appointment, but they don't go to the appointment, and then they die. And of course, people who do that their friends wouldn't say, oh, well, so-and-so was going to go to the vaccination appointment today, and then just a couple of hours after they were due to be vaccinated, they died, and they didn't go and get vaccinated because they were feeling too ill. Then again, people would make that connection and say, well, it was because they got an appointment to be vaccinated. So you wouldn't get people saying, well, so-and-so had an appointment to be vaccinated and they died just a couple of hours after they got that appointment. Then people wouldn't go on Twitter or Facebook and said, oh, my friend had an appointment to be vaccinated and then they died a couple of hours after. They wouldn't do that because people know that an appointment to be vaccinated does not cause people to die. Well, it's the same with vaccinations, with the appointment. That except with this very careful analysis, they managed to. So then this can help you to understand and why I, trained in mathematician, would not even begin to think about trying to analyse this without getting years of training. It's not enough to understand the maths, because you've got such a massive amount of data of people who are getting sick and who are dying and who are not, and who just that you've got to sift through it. And it really is quite remarkable that they find such tiny signals. And it's because they've got very sophisticated techniques and a huge amount of experience that they have learned how to do it, to pick out this tiny weak signal, that out of all these 45 emergencies every hour, out of all these 1 death every hour, then they look over those for 2 weeks, and amongst all those emergencies and all those deaths, they pick up the tiny signal that there was a doubling of the risk of getting an inflammation of the hearts. So when you look at it like that, it's really quite striking and quite amazing that they're able to pick out such tiny signals out of such a vast amount of sickness that happens when you study such a huge population. So that is how to think it. And instead of going and then you start thinking, well, that is how absolutely remarkable these people are who do this analysis. So try and turn it around to respect to the people who do these extraordinarily delicate analyses. It's remarkable how developed and advanced the science is, that they are able to do these studies and find such very subtle effects. So that is the true situation. And now what is this about? Oh yes, this is someone who said, so this is the report thing that these people are searching, and they're finding all these crazy things in it. And these are actually self-reported. So some of them will be doctors reporting, some of them will be people who just log in, and anyone can log in and report it. And there's 6,000 people in the world who die every minute. That's another assumption there. And there were 300, that was the time I was writing, 300. And remember, most of those people have been vaccinated now. And I know those people who get vaccinated, 9,000 die every minute. So that means that over 6,000 die every minute. And suppose that half of them were vaccinated. That means 3,000 people died in the minute after they were vaccinated, or the minute before they were vaccinated, except just by chance. Or they would, except that maybe it's a bit safer where you could go and get vaccinated than where people normally die, because you have all the nurses and things around, and they rush you off to hospital and you wouldn't die. So anyway, amongst all these people who get something that happens after they're vaccinated, you can just go in and you can sign on, and you can sign in this thing, you fill in the form and you say, I'm in the United States. I couldn't do it because I'm not in the United States. And you can just go in and you can sign it, and then you can say, you just say, this person claimed that he was turning into the Incredible Hulk as a result of being vaccinated. And then it was removed, but it was there for a while, and he did it just to show how anything can get into the system. So you need to be aware of that as well, that some things someone could just go in and completely make something up. It's far more likely that someone would go in and they would say something and they go into a lot of detail, and it's actually they're not really medically trained, and then it has to be followed up by a doctor. And then when they do pull them up, they look and they find patterns and they chase them up, and then that's when they manage to do these analyses, and they manage to find these things out. And so, yeah, so it says on it, reports may include incomplete, inaccurate, coincidental and unverified information. And so the person who claimed he was going to turn into the Incredible Hulk, and nobody had got as far as vetting it yet at that point. So then you get these amateur non-mathematicians, non-trained people who then go through this sifted, incomplete, inaccurate, coincidental and unverified information, and they don't know how to analyse it, they just don't have a clue. And then you get people scared, and they believe that this means lots of people are dying because of vaccines, and they are not. And I include here a thread that explains for infectious disease doctor, and then it goes through these examples. Yes, I think I'll leave it for you. You can go and read that. And then, so some people have an issue with needle phobia. So in that case, that is a perfectly valid reason for don't feel shy about telling the nurse that you've got needle phobia, and telling your doctor and consulting about it before you go, the various things you can do to deal with needle phobia. And this is nothing to do with being clever or not being clever. And some highly trained doctors and nurses have needle phobia, and they will. There was one example of a nurse who was on television. They volunteered to be the first to be vaccinated or something, so they were on television being vaccinated, and they fainted, and they had needle phobia or something. And I don't know how it was that it wasn't caught beforehand, but so you need to be. I remember that incident. I'd probably have to hunt it up, but so don't be ashamed if you've got needle phobia. It happens to lots of people, and the ways to get vaccinated are less triggering, and then there's the possibility in the future. And it's really very common. I've got quite a few people who've commented and saying that they have needle phobia, and then so if you do get needle phobia, it's quite common in the future. Hopefully, we will have nasal vaccines. So they may actually be more effective than the needle vaccines. And so, anything else? I think that's it. I think I've gone through everything. Yes, 1 million people living for one day. It's like one person living for 2,740 years. What's that based on? Forget about that bit. Yeah, so if you had 1 million people, if you had 1 million days, you divide by 365, you still get 2,740 years. So like I was telling you, that people live for much less than 1 million days. So you take 1 million and divide by 365, you clearly get much higher number than 100. And 365 multiplied by 100, if you live for 100 days, that's 365 thousand, that's 365. If you live for 100 years, that's 36,500 days, not a million days. If you lived for a million days, that'd be 2,740 years. So think about how many accidents you would have in 2,740 years. And that's how many in and then imagine all of those concentrated into one day, and those are all the accidents that those million people will have in one day. So that so that was quite a good thing to include. That's like a summary. So it's really quite a simple calculation that a million days is far longer than a typical lifetime. So it's not that we don't live for very long, we do live for quite long, but it's because a million is a much bigger number than most people realise. A million days is 2,740 years, and it's it's a couple of more than a couple of dozen times, a couple of dozen lifetimes. So hopefully that will help you to understand why there's so many incidents in the VAERS. And if you think about hundreds of millions, then that's equivalent to multiply that by 100. So if you look at 100 million people vaccinated, in the United States there have been several hundred million vaccinations, especially as everyone's been vaccinated several times. Many have been vaccinated 4 times. So that would be into the billions of vaccinations. So instead of a million people, you have billions, so then you'd have 2,740,000 years if you've got a billion people vaccinated, vaccines. And then think about all the accidents they would have in their lifetime. All those people in if you were living for 2.7 million years, how many incidents you would have, and then any of those can go and post on social media and say, well, I had an accident on the same day as my vaccination, and they will post if it happened within a few days or it even happened a couple of weeks later, and they'll still think that there was a connection. So I hope all this will help you to be, and is there anything else here that I haven't talked about? Oh, so I did have another video about this. Oh well, I didn't realise I'd already got a video up about this. So then that hopefully will all help you and help you to be a lot less scared about this whole thing. And so I'm going to upload this, but do respect other people. Remember that they do sincerely believe that they were harmed by the vaccine, even if perhaps they weren't. And then a very few of the people that you meet online, you may not. It's highly unlikely you actually meet anyone who really was that does know someone who's harmed by the vaccine. But then, if you remember that someone who was harmed by the vaccine, then they might go around and tell lots and lots of people. They might go and be on Twitter and Facebook, and some stranger, someone you don't really know, it would be more likely, and goes and comments on your post, saying, "Oh, I was harmed by the vaccine. My friend was harmed." And don't immediately assume that they weren't, because amongst the billions of vaccinations, there's very few cases. There's the myocarditis by Pfizer, especially if they over-exercised. There's the blood clots, especially early on with AstraZeneca, just a few in a million, very rare. But your personal risk is extremely remote, and I had absolutely no hesitation in going and getting vaccinated with all my vaccines, and I will be looking forward. Indeed, I would wish that they did them every 6 months instead of every year, because the vaccination wanes. And I was only offered mine a year later. The ones who were somewhat elderly, could get their vaccine a little bit earlier in the year, and I would have got mine if I'd had the opportunity, 6 months earlier. And because unlike, and that's another thing people wonder, is why are you vaccinated so often? Because with most vaccinations, you just vaccinate as a child, and that's it. Well, the reason is that it's a different kind of vaccine, a different kind of sickness. In COVID-19, if you look at the colds, you get colds very frequently, and there are only 8 common colds, and there are only 4 of them caused by coronaviruses. And you tend to get them many times in your lifetime. And the reason is because you get the same cold over and over and over again. You can be infected by the same cold, OC43 for instance, the same year. You can be infected again and again in the same year, and it doesn't even evolve much. It's not because of it evolving and evading like it is with flu. With the coronavirus viruses, they can evade your immune system, they can kind of erase their own memory, they can kind of hide their very sophisticated ways of hiding from the immune system, and they kind of persuade your immune system to forget them. And so you if you get vaccinated, especially, and you actually lose it more if you get the actual disease. But even with the vaccine, then it just doesn't create a very clear memory in the immune system. There are lots and lots of things that it remembers, and only some of them are actually effective. It's very good at confusing your immune system with lots of nonsense that doesn't actually protect against the virus. And and your immune system forgets it very easily. And so they're trying to. I'm not sure if they really know entirely. I would have to do a separate video and then look it up and search it and check to really explain that properly. I hope you haven't kind of mis-summarized that. But I don't think they really are totally sure why it is that coronaviruses get forgotten so quickly. They have a few hints about it, and they're following it up, and then they're developing vaccines that may have a much stronger response and be remembered much longer, and they're in the clinical trials, and they are indeed developing a much stronger response, and they are being remembered longer. So there's very good possibility that in future vaccines, then we've got a possibility of mucosal vaccines, but I'll do a separate video about all that. I've got a blog post about all that the mucosal vaccines especially, then the nasal sprays that I talked about, they give you tissue-resident immune response in the mucosal membranes, and that includes the membranes of your nose and mouth and your lungs and your stomach as well, and the ones that the intramuscular vaccines don't give tissue-resident mucosal memories. So especially memory B cells in mucosal membranes, then you don't get much of that at all with the intramuscular vaccines for some reason. And that if you do a nasal spray, then you get them very strongly. And this means that you get a very fast response, because you've got these memory cells in your noses, memory T cells, memory B cells, or whatever they call them. You know, the T cells are the killer ones, and the B cells are the ones that do the antibodies, but they're in the mucosal membranes, and they produce IFA, or whatever it is, I think it's IFA or something. They produce things that actually spread through the mucosal membranes that counteract the viruses, and so these may well provide sterilizing immunity where you don't even get sick, and stop long COVID, stop the sickness. These would be that's what I'm hoping for. Is it could happen much faster with a stronger injection, but we've got so many vaccines, dozens of vaccines in clinical trials right now, and two mucosal vaccines, 3 have been approved, one by Iran, but the Iran government never paid for it, one by India and one by China, where they are actually using them. And these may provide sterilizing immunity, which means that you wouldn't even get COVID. And it may provide 90% or more, maybe even 95% sterilizing immunity. So I think that when we get the sterilizing immunity, I think there's a decent chance. So some of the experts I follow, they look at this data and they say, well, and uh, Dr. Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization, he was saying there's a decent chance that we get this, and it could be a game changer. And various others, people very expert about it, they think there's a decent chance that we can get sterilizing immunity from mucosal vaccines. And there's good evidence from animals, and there's decent evidence so far. But the thing is, they don't know what are the correlates. So they can measure the antibodies, and they say, oh well, you're getting pretty strong antibodies in your mucosal membranes with the clinical trials, but they don't know what level of antibodies you need in your mucosal membranes in order to have sterilizing immunity. And so there's this gap. And so, but there's a possibility that, so you get sterilizing immunity in animals, you get boosted mucosal antibody responses and T cell responses in humans. And then the last missing bit of the puzzle is, do you get sterilizing immunity in practice with humans when they're getting infected and they don't know yet? And we should find out. Codagenics is doing a proper double-blind trial in Africa, where there's in places where they've got very low levels of vaccination still, and those trials, it's quite a good trial because they have several vaccines at once, and so if you go and join this trial, then you have quite a high chance of getting one of the trial vaccines, and then there's a pretty good chance that the vaccine you get is actually better than Pfizer or Moderna. So actually, if you give me a choice, I get the Pfizer Moderna vaccine, or do I join the World Health Organization trial instead? I might even consider joining the World Health Organization trial, thinking, well, actually, even though it's a possibility I just get the placebo, my overall chance is really quite decent that I get maybe even a better vaccine than anyone else in the world has as yet, depending what you rate the chances of them being sterilizing immunity. So somewhere in Africa, there's some people getting cogenics, and it's quite possible that some of them are being completely prevented from getting COVID just as we're speaking, and that they won't know until they unblind them at the end of sometime in 2023. They might go and look at the data and they say, well, look, none of the people who got cogenics got COVID, and it's entirely possible we discover that, but we're not going to discover until 2023 sometime, because it's quite a small trial. If they had 10 times the trial, they could do it in just 2-3 months. So the larger the trial, the faster they do it. If it's a trial that would take a year, then if you have 10 times as many people in the trial, because it's much more expensive, then you can do it in a month or two. And that's how we got the trials completed so quickly in 2020. And if they could rush out large amounts of funding to do the trials for mucosal vaccines, they could be completed much faster. And then they could also make all the vaccines all ready to surge out if people needed it. But we should find out sometime in 2023. And then I think that maybe this will tip over the vaccine misinformation, because once it gets to the point where the people who get vaccinated just don't get COVID at all, then that will really be quite striking, because a lot of people are getting COVID multiple times a year. And so if amongst all your friends, the ones who haven't been vaccinated are still getting COVID, the ones getting vaccinated aren't, I think that might be the tipping point where people start thinking, well, there must be something wrong with this. And they start and then all their friends saying, well, look at us, we're not getting COVID at all. And then so many people getting long COVID and so on. So I think that might be the vaccine misinformation tipping point. And it works like a tipping point. And once a few people start seeing it, then lots of people, and once all your friends are saying it, then you might start considering it yourself, and then start shifting yourself. So anyway, but I'm not doing this to try to convert people who sincerely believe there's some problem with the vaccines and who are not getting vaccine. I'm doing this to help the scared people who are who want to be vaccinated, but then they get people piling on their social media feed saying don't get vaccinated because you'll die. It's nonsense. So please don't listen to them, block them, listen to your doctor. And just if you do post on your social media and say, oh, hooray, I'm getting vaccinated, and then some people come on your thing and say you're going to die of that, then, just try and take it with, because I do see that, sadly, then just try and take it with, just realise that they're just people who've been confused by the junk science and the people with no training in maths who do this amateur statistics and just not having a clue what they're doing. There's so many amateurs, and they say, I'm not trained I have no idea about the medicine, but I have studied maths, and they make the most basic mistakes in simple statistics, and then they go on YouTube and they tell the world that it's dangerous. So please don't listen to these people. They're not idiots, but they're saying very idiotic things. If only they knew a little bit about statistics, then they would just realise how idiotic the things are that they're saying. So I'm not saying they're idiots, they're clever people, but they just don't understand the nuances of statistics, and so they say things that are idiotic because they're just speaking way outside their field. And you've probably heard people saying idiotic things outside their field about anything. It could be about cake recipes or anything. If they don't know a clue about it, then they're bound to say things that are idiotic, and these are just the same. They they don't realise they don't realise that how little they know, and they're just saying things that's so idiotic that just most basic statistics. If you've learnt basic statistics, then you can see right through it. So anyway, hope this helps. So I'll just stop the recording and upload it.